Tell your story.
Change the conversation.
Organized by students.
TEDxYouth at SHC.
Remember that one kid in your class growing up, the loud one constantly talking, the one who always asked too many questions and never followed the lesson, the annoying one who always had way too much energy or was always daydreaming? Everyone has had that kid in their class. You know, the frustrating kid the teacher always had to tell to focus. Well, I was that kid. Hi, my name is Mia, and I have ADHD, also known as Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. This is my story of being diagnosed as a teenager, and I hope that by sharing my journey with you today, I can help other kids going through the same struggles realize they are not alone in this process. From a very young age, I could tell that I was different. I was always the kid who couldn't focus. Teachers would exile me to the back of class, where I couldn't bother anyone. They were always frustrated with me when I didn't understand instructions, and I was frustrated with myself. Why can't I just get it? Eventually, this classroom frustration began to impact my academic progress. When I was in the 3rd grade, I vividly remember attending my Catholic school's academic honors assembly. This was an opportunity for students' academic efforts to be recognized by the entire school in front of family and friends. For me, it was yearly torture. I remember seeing what at the time felt like everybody in my grade going to be congratulated for their successes, something that I could never seem to attain. As we watched our peers parade onto that stage, the few kids left were frozen, glued to their seats, trying their best to ignore the fact that they were not good enough. I know because I was always one of those kids. I quietly cried to myself after my attempts to force back the tears were unsuccessful in that empty pew. I remember the sadness, anger, and embarrassment like it was yesterday. I remember telling myself that I never wanted to feel that way again, embarrassed to be me. I later learned the feeling I felt that day would become familiar to me, and it was common to many people with undiagnosed ADHD. This is when the stigma of growing up with ADHD began to influence my unhealthy mindset. 7 years later, when I was a freshman in high school, I was diagnosed with ADHD when I was 14. 7 years. So, what is ADHD and who has it? In 2016, the CDC estimated there were 6.1 million children ages 2 to 17 diagnosed with ADHD. According to the CDC, an award-winning magazine about ADHD called Attitude Magazine, ADHD is a developmental impairment of the brain's executive functions, which results in trouble with impulse control, focusing, and organization. ADHD is one of the most common neurodevelopmental disorders of childhood, but it impacts people of all ages. Now, there are 3 types of ADHD, but I have primarily inattentive ADHD. The same magazine describes symptoms of inattentive ADHD as limited attention span, distractibility, forgetfulness, or procrastination, resulting in careless mistakes and difficulty organizing tasks and activities. They are easily distracted by external stimuli and often lose things, may leave projects unfinished, or appear not to listen to you when you speak. These are all symptoms of inattentive type ADHD. However, they are not personal defects. According to the Journal of Clinical Child and Adolescent Psychology, girls are significantly underdiagnosed compared to boys, with boys being 2 times more likely to be diagnosed than girls with ADHD. This can be attributed to the common misconception that ADHD is only in super energetic or troubled kids. This means that women with ADHD often aren't diagnosed until adulthood, like my mother, who was only diagnosed a year after me. Even though my mother is a successful nurse practitioner, she didn't recognize her symptoms because of the stigma and didn't realize the resources available to her until she saw how much they helped me. But why is this important? According to the National Institute of Mental Health, symptoms of inattentive ADHD are far less likely to be recognized by parents, teachers, and medical professionals, and rarely do they get the treatment they need. This leads to academic frustration, apathy, and shame that can last a lifetime. When undiagnosed, ADHD can lead to people spending their adulthood trying to overcompensate for the executive functioning limits that produce shame from consistent academic and social struggles when they were children, which often manifest with the development of perfectionistic tendencies and a judgmental self-image. This can result in increased anxiety, depression, and even physical side effects such as panic attacks and insomnia. But neuroscience, brain imaging, and clinical research tell us that ADHD is not a behavior disorder, not a mental illness, or a specific learning disability. It is a developmental impairment of the brain self-management system. Grateful as I was for my diagnosis, it frustrated me that I could have begun to understand myself so much sooner. I could have avoided 7 years of asking myself, why can't I just get it? It wasn't until I was diagnosed that I realized there was a reason for why I felt different, why I always felt inferior to my neurotypical peers. I think this is expressed perfectly by Jessica Makabe in her brilliant TEDx talk about ADHD when she said, "If you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it is stupid." And while you might assume that the treatment and counseling received after diagnosis resolved all of my ADHD-related struggles and mindset, unfortunately, this was not true. On one hand, being diagnosed with ADHD was a relief and helped me understand why I struggled for so long, but it also confirmed all of my self-doubts accumulated throughout the years. Being diagnosed for me was a double-edged sword. At first, it felt like I was officially stupid compared to normal people. And I gave into self-loathing thoughts after my diagnosis, seeing myself as a problem that needed to be fixed. I focused only on the negative side of ADHD, ignoring the fact that my brain was not neurotypical. I held myself to impossible standards so I could perform more like a normal person. And being exposed to a new world of resources and requirements was often overwhelming but disappointing. Suddenly, I needed extra time, educational specialists, therapists, aides, counselors, and medication, but still felt lost and didn't know how to navigate this new territory. It wasn't until my junior year, when I was really struggling, that I found out I had more resources. I learned the importance then of asking specific questions early on, like, what are the full extent of my resources? How can I apply them? How does this school's resources compare to other schools? How can I work with teachers to ensure they meet my academic needs? During my junior year of high school, my negative self-talk, perfectionistic tendencies, and thinly stretched mental and physical health resulted in me hitting a brick wall. I broke down completely and had constant panic attacks. I hated myself for needing to ask teachers for extra help and always felt like a burden. I felt awful in my own skin and thought that everyone hated me and no one really understood me because I didn't even understand myself. I also came face to face with the stigma surrounding ADHD and especially medication for it. I felt ashamed for needing it and taking it. I was embarrassed to tell my friends and ashamed to take my medication in public. I sometimes still am. When I take my medication, I can really focus on things. But what no one told me is that if I'm not careful, instead of focusing for 3 hours on my essay due tomorrow, I can easily instead focus on my Instagram page. I've also experienced weight and mood changes and sleep struggles as side effects. I also learned that sometimes medication doesn't always work for some people with ADHD. After my attempts to find support on this issue and understand my feelings of stigma, I realized there weren't many people I knew advocating for those with ADHD. I started researching the condition and realized I was not alone in my confusion, embarrassment, or frustration. I learned about successful celebrities like Simone Biles, Michael Phelps, and Justin Timberlake, all who have ADHD but push through their struggles to become success stories. I started writing papers and doing projects on ADHD and the stigma. But most importantly, I changed my mindset. I stopped comparing myself to normal people and started to work to understand myself and my condition. I learned to understand and accept the process my mind has and the way it does things. I learned how to learn best from my brain and how to stop letting others' opinions about my ADHD embarrass me. Though there are negatives of ADHD, there are also positives. I know that it allowed me to excel and focus 210% on the things that I am passionate about. For example, I have great communications and writing skills, which I didn't realize until I had a very successful summer job last year as a salesperson, where I was one of the top representatives and assumed a leadership position. So yeah, I was always a loud kid in the back of class, but because I had to advocate to all my teachers for extra time and stand up to myself when others didn't believe in me, I got these great skills. Understand that having ADHD just means you are someone who differs from your neurotypical peers. It means that you will have a different process in approaching problems and solving them, but it doesn't mean that you can't solve problems. The best part is you don't have to hit a brick wall to uncover your strengths. You just have to believe in yourself and change your mindset now. And most importantly, understand that ADHD is an ongoing journey and a challenge that will most likely continue our whole lives. There is no magic pill or solution that will completely solve our ADHD and make us neurotypical. However, we can work with our unique brains to innovate solutions and behaviors that will allow us to become our most successful selves. So please don't label yourself a failure like I did. Label yourself as someone with untapped potential, just waiting to show the world the best you have to offer. Thank you.